starting. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the webinar, Bullseye, How to Create a Resume Targeted to a Specific Job with alumna Debra Franke. My name is Lucy Sandell, and I'm excited to hear this content. Before I invite Debra to start, let's go over a few housekeeping rules for today's presentation. First, on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a panel with multiple tabs. The first tab you'll see is the chat tab, and many of you have been using it already today. Great. You can also use this tab to chat with one another or to chat with me privately if you want to. The second tab is the Q&A tab where you can send in your questions. We're saving time at the end of the presentation to answer these questions, so please send them in throughout the webinar. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can. Should you experience any technical issues during the webinar, you can email the Big Marker team for further assistance at support@bigmarker.com. Lastly, a link to the recording of the webinar will be sent to all registrants in 2 business days. Now let me share a little bit about our presenter today. Debra Franke is a career coach focused on helping individuals conduct a successful job search, plan and execute a career change, and/or manage their careers for personal and professional satisfaction. As Associate Director of Alumni Career Programs at LaSalle University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Debra supports alumni career development, transition, and job search, as well as alumni student career engagement. So now I'm thrilled to pass over the baton to Debra. Thanks, Debra.
Thank you, Lucy. And I'm really looking forward to being with everyone today and sharing with you a process that I have developed over the last 10 years as I've worked with alumni here at LaSalle University. And it feels like one of those circle of life moments, to be honest with you, to be presenting to fellow Northwestern alumni. Because it was quite many moons ago, as you can see from my graduation year, that I graduated with my environmental engineering degree and started out on my own career journey. And now I have the pleasure of working with alumni at all ages and stages on their career journeys. So just to briefly cover the agenda for today, we're going to begin by talking about the job search black hole and what are some implications of that, and also how to create a resume that's targeted to a specific job. And that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. I'll go over a few examples, and then we will have time for Q&A. The job search black hole. You may have heard this term. If you haven't heard it and you've been in the job search very long, you may have experienced it. You may be experiencing it right now. So what is the job search black hole? Well, this is the feeling when you apply online to 1 job, 5 jobs, 10 jobs, 20, 50, maybe 100 jobs and hear nothing. Hello out there, is anybody alive? That silence can be frustrating. It can also be demotivating. And unfortunately, it can also eat away at your self-confidence. And you begin to doubt yourself and your skills and your experience and whether or not you're going to be able to land a position. So before we talk about how to get out of the black hole, let's just talk about what happens when you apply for a job that's been posted online. Okay, so in any medium to large organization, even smaller organizations these days, when you apply online, your application is going into a human resources software called an applicant tracking system or applicant tracking software, abbreviated ATS. And you'll hear about ATS when you read about job search techniques and strategies and tips and all that. And basically the purpose of the ATS software is to keep track of where your application is in the hiring process, along with the dozens, hundreds, thousands perhaps of other applications for not only the position you're applying for, but all the other current open positions. Now, because companies are so overwhelmed by the number of applications they get. Very often these applicant tracking systems are set up to do the initial filter or initial screen. So the ATS software is programmed by a person to look for specific keywords or key phrases. It can also look at your job titles and then the dates and calculate how many years of experience you have doing sales or being a manager or whatever it is that they're setting as a requirement. Some of the ATS systems do what's called context-specific analysis, and not only finds that keyword or that key phrase, but it looks at the words around it and uses that context or that relevance to make a decision whether or not you have what they're looking for. So anywhere from 25 to 75% of applications can be screened out by the ATS system before a person ever looks at anything. So if you've ever applied and within seconds or minutes, you've gotten the thanks but no thanks, that wasn't a person. That was the applicant tracking system saying, hey, you didn't meet our minimum criteria for passing through this first screen. So do qualified applicants get screened out at this point? They do. Yep. Do unqualified applicants pass through? They do. But because companies are just so overwhelmed with the number of applications they get, they use the ATS to get it done to a manageable number. So then someone in human resources function may take a quick look at your resume, skimming it, looking for, again, key information, key criteria that they're going to decide whether or not you're going to stay in the pool or not. You might be, at this point, invited to a phone screen or a phone interview with a human resources assistant, with a recruiter, with a talent acquisition professional, okay? And it's important when you get invited to a phone interview to know who that's with, how long it's going to take. Is it just one person? Will it be more than one, et cetera, okay? And you want to prepare accordingly. So nowadays, you might also encounter something called asynchronous interviews. And this is where you are actually answering questions to your computer screen, but there's no person there. They're being recorded. And then that human resources professional or recruiter reviews that later and again decides you're going to make it through that screen or that level of filter. So the goal in all these different steps is to screen out unqualified or less qualified candidates. So only the most qualified actually are sent to the hiring manager. So some reasonable number of applications then get sent to the hiring manager, who may actually already have several candidates in mind before they even get the package from HR. The hiring manager, just to be clear, is the person that you would report to if you were hired, okay? And they're the one who's going to make the hiring decision. They may schedule a brief phone interview with you. Now, even if it's a 10 or 15 minute, you want to prepare for that as if it was that traditional face-to-face, 30-minute, 60-minute classic interview, job interview, because they could ask you anything, and you certainly want to come across as having researched the company, researched the position, learned all you can. You come with intelligent questions. So even if it's a short phone interview with the hiring manager, you want to be well prepared for that. Now, based on those phone interviews, the hiring manager narrows that down further, and then maybe does some in-person interviews. So maybe we're down to 3 or to 5 candidates. Or nowadays, of course, ubiquitous Zoom or interview, right? And then maybe the last 2 candidates will have to do a presentation or meet with the team or stand on their head and chew bubble gum for an hour. I mean, whatever, right? So I'm trying to paint this picture of multiple filters, multiple levels of screen until the hiring manager makes an offer. And you want to be that one person still standing at the end of the process. Now, what are some implications? I'm going to make three major implications of all this. One, it has to do with the resume. Your resume has to be written for multiple audiences, for the applicant tracking system, for that person in human resources, the recruiter, and for the hiring manager. It needs to be full of these keywords and key phrases. We don't have time right now to talk about how to figure out what those keywords are for you, but I have written an article on that. I'm going to send a link to that to Lucy. Everyone who registered will get a link to that article. You want your resume to pass through that initial ATS screen. You want it to demonstrate your qualifications. And you want it to be easy to skim because people don't read resumes. They skim them 6, 8, 10 seconds. Boom. They skim them. They get the information they need. They decide whether you go on to the next level in the process. Second implication. It might be really crucial for you to develop what I call internal advocates in your target companies or target organizations. We're not going to talk at all today about how to do that, but I do think it's really, really essential, particularly if you're not getting a response with your resume. Even with a targeted resume, you're not getting a response, then you've got to do these next 2 steps. The best resource I have found for how to go about creating these internal advocates is a book called The 2-Hour Job Search by Steve Dalton. If you do get it, be sure and get the 2nd edition. And then thirdly, it's going to be really important to build professional connections in your field and in your industry, because these are going to help you uncover what's called the hidden job market. What that really means is the jobs that never get advertised anywhere. It also gives you the opportunity to learn about openings before they're posted, and to build connections in the companies you don't even know about. Okay, so these are some of the 3 key implications of how the current hiring process works. We're going to focus just on the first one, the resume, today. And I'm going to walk you through an 8-step process on how to customize your resume so it's targeted to a specific job. Now, when might you want to use this process? Because this is going to take time, going to take blood, sweat, and tears, okay? You're going to really invest effort into this. So when is it worthwhile to do this? Well, if what you're doing now isn't working. So if you're getting no response, if you're using the same resume for every job and you're getting no response, then it's time to move on and try this process. I want to pause for a moment and just say, this is so important, so crucial. So, if you're busy doing something else right now, take a pause and really let this soak in, okay? And some of you know this already. But even so, it's good to be reminded that your resume is not a history of everything you've done. It is a marketing document that demonstrates your qualifications for where you want to go, which means there is a lot that you have done the further you go in your career that's never going to show up on the resume because it's not relevant to where you want to go. So please, it's not a historical document or hysterical, I hope, but it's a marketing document. All right, so step 1 of our process is to create what I call a resume shell or skeleton. Take your current resume and strip out all the content. So you're going to keep your heading with your name and contact info. You're going to keep your work experience, just the employer, the title, and the dates. Your education, basic information, major, year, school, okay? Most likely you're going to have a skills section. Typically, these are going to be technical and computer skills. Occasionally, it might be something like a language skill if that's potentially relevant. Some other sections on your resume shell you might want to consider. I'm going to suggest you include at the top some kind of a profile or summary, qualifications, professional summary, that sort of thing. We'll get to that in a moment. And you may want to have some other sections, for instance, other relevant experience. Here you can bring in volunteer work or freelance work or a hobby or other things that are relevant to the position you're applying for. And professional development, which answers the question, how is this person keeping current in the field? But those are those somewhat optional sections. All right, so you're going to create this resume shell. Now we're going to turn to the job posting itself. And we're going to first copy the entire job description from wherever you found it. and paste it into a Word document or whatever software you're using. Now, I know in Word, when you go to paste, you can use this feature called Keep Text Only when you paste it. It's that little clipboard with the A symbol. What that does is it strips out most of the formatting you're bringing over from wherever you're copying from. So use that. Now, there might be some unnecessary information in there, some leftover formatting. You want to just get rid of that. You don't need it. Blah, blah, blah about all the benefits, or sometimes the information about the company might be helpful as you're writing the resume. If there's a paragraph about the department or the team you're going to be at and what their mission is, you probably want to keep that there, okay, and not take that out. Okay, so let me see here. So the things you want to be sure and keep is very often there's a paragraph or sentence that's an overview of the role, and then the specifics about what they want the person to do, the qualifications and requirements, all those sections you want to keep. And now the fun begins, okay? So what you're going to do next with that job posting that you've copied over is you're gonna find out I love bullets, okay? Maybe it's my engineering. I like, things lined up in a row. Bullets and spreadsheets, my best friends. So you're going to create a bullet for each thing the employer wants this person to do, each knowledge or skill they want this person to have or to use. So here's an example. Here we have primary duties, and this is that opening sentence or opening paragraph, okay? And this is an important paragraph if it's there in the job description, because it gives you the essence, the gist of the job. And that's going to be really helpful, for instance, when you're writing your summary or your profile, okay? It tells you kind of what the job's about. Then we get into the responsibilities or tasks or that sort of thing. And that's the detail of how the person's going to accomplish what's in that first paragraph. And so you'll see that, for instance, the bullet that started develops and implement, novel and innovative, okay, I actually broke that into 2 bullets. And then you'll see just below that, validate existing, you'll see there was a list there, and I bulleted each thing separately, okay? Strategic planning, execution, and reporting, there was a semicolon. And so I broke that into 2 bullets. So you're taking the molecule and you're breaking it down into the atoms, okay? Each individual piece. Here's the education requirements section, qualifications, those kinds of things. Same thing here, okay? 3+ years of postgraduate experience, preferably in gene therapy. I created 2 bullets there. Extensive experience using analytical tools such as, I showed each one separate, okay? Now, obviously how you break it down might be different from how I do it, okay? But the idea here is you want to make it really easy to be able to go through the job description and begin to mark the things where you do match and where you don't match the requirements. So if you've seen lots of job descriptions, you know that some of them have very long sentences with many, many tasks listed in that one sentence. You're going to break those down into individual bullets. Other ones, the bullets are pretty much already done for you. You just want to look through and see, hey, is there anything I want to create these sub-bullets for? So doing this does 2 things. One is it slows you down, okay? And the other thing is it gets you ready for the next step. And in the next step, we're going to get out our highlighters, either real highlighters or our computer highlighter. And we're going to color code the job posting. And here's how we're going to color code. Now, there's nothing magical about the 4 categories I'm going to show you. But these are the 4 categories that, as I've worked with alumni, people seem to find most helpful. And there's certainly nothing magical about the colors I'm using here, okay? If you want to use different colors, that's fine. If you have the ability to print, at this point, you might want to print out the job posting that you've bulleted, right? And grab a set of highlighters and just go through and do it. or you can keep it up on your computer screen and use the highlighting feature, which is what I'm going to demonstrate here. So we're going to use yellow to mark things that you know you can do, and you have some kind of proof or evidence you can put in your resume. Now, we typically think, oh, that has to come from my paid employment, okay? But it could also come from things like your volunteer work in the community or with your professional association or with your university, okay? It could come from perhaps you're in a field where you're required to take certain continuing education, okay? So maybe you have learned about a concept, even though you're not using it in your paid work at this time, but you've learned about it through continuing ed or other kind of professional development that you're doing. That proof or evidence could come from your education if your education is fairly recent. I would say within the last 5 years or so. Could even be a hobby of yours, that there's something about what you do in that hobby or how you do it, okay, that's going to be relevant to the job and provide some of that proof or evidence. Maybe you have a side business or doing freelance work. You could include that as your proof or evidence. And for students and recent grads, certainly extracurricular activities can provide that proof or evidence. So in some cases, you want to think beyond just paid employment as the place where that proof or evidence can come from. All right, we're going to use green for things you don't have proof or evidence for. Okay, means you haven't done it. You didn't learn about it. Okay, now, even for the things we mark green, there still may be things you want to include in your resume to support your ability to do the green. Now, the green represents the stretch in the job, right? And in most cases, when you take a new position, there's stretch for you. Certainly when I started in my current role 10 years ago, I would say about 25% of the job I could walk in and do from day one. Another 25 to 35%. So I picked up pretty quickly, and the rest was stretch. It was learning. Okay, so that's what the green represents. But in my case, when I applied for the job I have now 10 years ago, one of the things in the job description was conducting webinars. All right, and being on the admin side, like Lucy is today. Well, I had taken webinars, but I had never presented one. I'd never had the admin, but I knew I could do that. So that was a green for me. But I could still include things in my resume like learning new software, piloting new programs, collaborating with colleagues on developing training and educational material. So pieces that were relevant, even though I hadn't done that specific thing. All right, we're going to use blue for things that we read and like, what are they talking about? Now, sometimes it's just an acronym that is you haven't encountered before or specific to that company, maybe software that company uses you're not familiar with. Sometimes it's the way something's worded, okay? Ideally, before you apply, if you're not sure what it means, you want to try and find out what it means before you apply. And then red is going to be a specific qualification or requirement that you don't have, that you don't match. So those are the 4 categories. Those are the colors we're going to use. But again, you can play around with this as you wish. But most people I've worked with find these categories to be helpful. So what does this look like? Well, here's that opening paragraph or statement that's sort of the big picture of the job. And I find very often it is so broad that it's really not very helpful to color code it, okay? But you can go ahead and do that if you want to. But here's the job description. And so again, the yellow are things that the candidate who's creating the resume has proof or evidence for from someplace, right? Paid work or other things. The green are things they don't have proof or evidence, but they look at it and they say, yeah, I could pick that up. Okay. To be honest with you, if you read something in the job description, you say, oh, I don't think I could do that, then why are you applying for the job? Okay. So, I mean, yes, there's going to be stretch, but if you really don't think you're going to be able to do something, then maybe you ought to rethink if that's the job for you. Okay. Now notice that a single bullet may have a mix of yellow and green, certain aspects that you have proof, other aspects that you don't. And then again, here's the blue. You're not sure what it means. When we look at the requirements, the qualification section, okay, here everything is either going to be yellow. Yes, I have proof or evidence. It's going to be blue. Well, I'm not sure what they mean by that. Or it's going to be red. Okay, it's a qualification or requirement you don't have. Now, again, if your education is fairly recent, maybe your undergrad isn't, but a graduate degree is, you can include a line, a bullet in the education section of your profile, coursework in, and you can list topic areas or skills that you covered in your coursework, even if you haven't used those or worked with them in your paid work. So coursework in, it's not necessarily course titles, but it's more kind of subject areas or skill areas. If you see the same things coming up as a red from job to job to job, then you have identified a skills or knowledge gap. And you may want to think about, well, what can I do to fill that gap, or at least fill it partially? So an alum I worked with who saw maybe a third to half of the jobs he was interested in, they wanted people with experience with Salesforce. He didn't have that. And so he did some self-learning, literally by watching YouTube videos, a LinkedIn course, okay? And then we found an alum that used Salesforce in a nonprofit and took some time to show this other alum how they used it. So in the professional development section of his resume, he could indicate that he had at least an understanding of how Salesforce was used in a nonprofit setting. He wasn't claiming he was an expert, but he could get that word in the resume, that keyword, okay? And in an interview, he could talk about the steps he had taken to build up his knowledge in that area, which shows that he's taking action to close that knowledge or skills gap. Okay, so we have finished the color coding of the entire job posting. Now, before we barge ahead, it's time to decide whether or not to apply for the job. So what are the qualifications or requirements that you don't meet? What are they? How significant do they seem to be? How much of that do you have? How likely is it there's other candidates that are going to have those qualifications and you don't? Now, there's no magic formula that you can plug in and boom, it tells you whether or not, this element and this element are going to keep you from the running, okay? So you just have to use your judgment. And again, the red may indicate that knowledge, skills, or experience gap, and you may have to think about how to fill that gap. Interesting studies have shown, okay, that men will tend to apply for a job even when they don't meet all the qualifications, and women will tend not to. So keep in mind, you do not need to be 100% match, and there's other factors to take into consideration in deciding whether or not to apply. So the next question is, how much green is there? Remember, green are those things that you don't have proof or evidence, but you feel like you could, catch on pretty quickly. How significant do those seem to be? Are there going to be other candidates for whom your green is their yellow, right? That they're, quote, more qualified because they've already done that. And again, there's no magic formula to figure out, it's not even worth the effort to apply for this. Because a crucial question is, how motivated are you now to put in the effort to customize your resume, to do the best job possible to show your qualifications? If you're really interested in the company, in the role, then you're highly motivated and you're going to go through the rest of the steps we're going to talk about. But if you're like, I could take it or leave it, and if you're seeing a lot of red and a lot of green, it's probably better to put your effort somewhere else. But only you can make that decision. Another key question is, do you have that internal advocate, that professional connection within the organization? Because suddenly the metrics on this change completely. When you have that internal advocate in the organization, suddenly you don't need to be a 90, 95% match. Maybe 60%, 70% is good enough. And that's why those other two steps that we're not talking about today are so crucial for the whole job search process, because having that internal advocate as I said, is going to make a huge difference in terms of you not having to measure up or match up perfectly. All right, we're going to assume you've decided to apply for the job. Then we're going to gather the evidence. So it's almost like you're in a court of law and you're trying to prove a case, okay? And what does a lawyer do? They bring in the evidence, right? But they tell a story with that evidence. And that's what you're going to do. The case you're trying to prove is, you ought to consider me. You ought to interview me, right? A resume does not get you a job. The goal of the resume is to generate interest to get you an interview. Or think about those papers you wrote in college, remember? Okay. I would say there's a reason I studied engineering, so I could avoid writing as many papers as possible. But I still had to write papers. So in some of your papers, you had a thesis, a premise, right? A hypothesis, whatever. And then you had to support it with evidence and write about that. So that's what you're trying to do here. What is the proof or evidence that you're going to put in the resume to demonstrate you're qualified for this position? So what you're going to do is go back to your color-coded job description. And again, if you printed it out, it's pretty easy at this point. Grab a pen or pencil, okay, and just jot notes. And as I said, even for the green things, there might be some things you think, oh, maybe I want to include this or whatever, okay? Now, it's not a one-on-one correlation. So a single, in my previous job, I did Project Y. That might cover several bullets, okay? So it's not for each bullet you're going to have one piece of proof, one piece of evidence. But wherever you have yellow, you want to be sure you're including the proof or evidence for that, and then look at the greens also and say, well, what can I include? Just jot down enough so when you come back, it'll jog your memory. Oh, you passed 3 projects at ABC. Oh, yeah. And so I wanted to make this point about that, okay? And keep in mind that these proof points that you're going to include in the resume, maybe you didn't do the exact same thing, but you did something similar, okay? Maybe what you did previously was on a smaller scale than what they're calling for in this job, but you did it. So include it. And it could be that for a previous position, right, you only talk about 5% of what you did, because that's the part of that previous position that's relevant to the position you're applying for. So when I transitioned from environmental engineering to management consulting, right, I was very careful in choosing the bullets that I used in my wastewater treatment years, 5 years with DuPont, okay? I only included things that related to, believe it or not, training and developing people. And I did have examples of that. It was probably about 3% of the job, but it was the 3% that was relevant to where I wanted to go. So remember what we said earlier, resume is not a history, it's a marketing document, okay? And you're laying out a case and you have to pull in the evidence now. Okay, so now we're going to talk about another type of evidence, or a specific type of evidence, which I call car stories. You may be more familiar with them as SAR or STAR or PAR stories, okay? When I say they're stories, I don't mean made up, okay? They're true stories, but they're you in action, you at your best, you demonstrating your qualifications. They paint a picture of how you do what you do and the value you bring to an organization. They differentiate you from others, and they help you get away from generalizations. So the three parts of a car story, okay? Part one is the context or situation, right? Here was the need, the problem, the opportunity, the context. A, action. Here is what I did. And when you're talking about the action part, you want to get into some detail, be very specific. So for instance, I got the team to agree, well, how did you get the team to agree? Did you meet individually with each person and listen to their point of view and present your ideas until, okay? Or did you create a team process where the team came to consensus? Or did you spend a week researching and then wrote a white paper and sent it out to everybody so that nobody could argue with your logic, right? All those people, right, got the team to agree, but how they did it was very different. Now, as you are writing out your car stories, if you find yourself writing, or as you're saying them, saying we, you want to change that to I. So it's fine that you have car stories that are group or team type things that you did, but you need to talk about what you did as part of that group or part of that team, not what the team as a group did. All right. So you want to stick with I. For some people, this is really hard. And then the R is the outcome, the result, the value, the benefit. Now, some of you may be saying, oh, this sounds really familiar. I've been told to prepare these when I'm getting ready for a job interview. And certainly, this is where car stories or SAR or STAR stories come in very often in response to a question like, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a colleague, okay? Give an example of coming up with an innovative program, okay? Because that's called behavioral interviewing. And what they're looking for is this 3-part story of a specific example. But car stories are also helpful for general networking conversations because, again, they bring you alive when you can tell these mini versions of you at your best. They're extremely helpful for performance reviews and salary discussions. And we're going to use them for creating your resume because what I call mini car stories, okay, they're the proof or evidence that you can do the job. And that's what we're after here. So just to emphasize, car stories get away from generalizations. I'm a great team player, and demonstrate what makes you distinctive. So I want to provide an example of a car story. So I asked an alumnus that I was working with, I said, why should somebody hire you and not someone else? What sets you apart from other candidates? And just as an aside, this is one of the most crucial questions of the job search. Probably the other most crucial question is, what is your target? Both in terms of role and type of organization and specific companies. But you better be clear on why somebody should hire you and not someone else. Because if you're not clear on that, how are you going to market yourself? How are you going to lay the case out, okay, in the courtroom? So this is all about what's called your professional brand. What you want to be known for, what distinguishes you, what your distinctives are. It's all about what you can do for the organization. So this particular alum said, well, I've been told that I'm pretty good at seeing where there might be conflict or resistance to change and turning that around to be a positive thing. I said, wow, very impressive. But you see how that's still a generalization? Okay. It's really not telling me that much about him. I want the proof. So I told him, go write a car story and send it to me. And he did. And I've been using it ever since as an example. So here's his car story. We're not going to take the time now to read it. Okay. I will send you a link to a web page that has this car story and another example on it. I just want to point out a couple things here. One is you see the 3 sections. Okay. The context, the action, the result. The second is he took the time to write it out. And I recommend you do that as well. And this is why the first time through this 8-step process is going to take some time and effort. It's going to take some knocking the brain and remembering what you did. And again, getting away from those generalizations. So the first time you go through this, analyze your job, color code it, proof points. What are the car stories that are going to support my qualifications? You might have to write 6, 8, maybe 10, maybe 12 car stories. Oh my gosh. But guess what? Next job you apply for, maybe you only need 1 or 2 new ones. And so you're going to create a book or a library, right? Save them all in one Word document. And you know what? When it comes time for that job interview, you are going to be so thankful you went through all this and that you've been working with the car stories all along, because more than half of your job interview prep is going to be done because you've already got these great car stories. All right. Another thing to notice is you're not going to put all that in a resume, are you? So you have to create what I call a mini car story. keeping in mind, what is it you want to highlight? What are they looking for? What do I need to highlight? So in the case of this alum, if he wants to emphasize he makes processes more efficient, he might write that 3-paragraph car story in his resume this way. It always starts with an applied pronoun, I, and then an action verb. I, what? Streamline budget templates. How? By involving plant managers in redesign. What was the outcome? Creating buy-in and reducing update time to almost 0. There it is. That's the mini car story. That goes into the resume in whatever job or role this happened. What if, though, he wants to emphasize his, what I call superpower of anticipating, seeing where there might be conflict or resistance, and making that a positive for everyone? He might write that same car story this way. I, what? Overcame initial hostility to upgrading budget templates. How? By seeking input from the plant controllers. What was the outcome? Resulting in a streamlined process that incorporated their concerns and insights. So that same car story can be told differently depending on what skill, what experience you're really trying to emphasize. So as I said, I will send a link to a page that goes through this, has this example on there. Okay, just a few comments about your mini car stories. I really do encourage you to take the time to write out your car stories, keep them together in one document, okay? And keep in mind that one mini car story may cover several bullets in the job description. And not every bullet in the posting is going to require the detail and specificity of a mini car story. You're going to put each of those mini car stories into your resume wherever it occurred. So let's see. Okay, so your evidence consists of these notes that you've made as well as your mini car stories. And you're going to now put that evidence into your resume. So here's Bob Hall. Yes, I lived in Bob Hall. So Mr. Bob Hall here. You see how he has put in his mini car stories into the specific positions where they happened. So that is his proof or evidence that he's qualified for this role. And they're also going to set him apart from other candidates. They're going to set him apart from other people whose resume is just a list of tasks and responsibilities. That's really crucial. You want to get beyond tasks and responsibilities and really help us to see how you go about doing what you do and what difference that makes to the organization. Then it's time to fill the holes, H-O-L-E-S. There's 3 types of holes. There's bullet holes, pun intended. There's your summary or profile section, and then other sections you may want to have in your profile. So this process of starting with the job description, analyzing, color coding, jotting down your proof and evidence, creating your car stories, creating your mini car stories, plugging them in, you may end up with some jobs that didn't get enough or didn't get any bullets, okay? Now, the applicant tracking system doesn't care. It doesn't care how long your resume is. It doesn't care how many bullets you have under a job. It doesn't care about any of that. But a person reading or skimming your resume is going to have certain expectations. The more recent a position, the more relevant it is, the longer you were there, they're going to expect to see more bullets. The further in the past it is, the shorter the time you were there, the less relevant it is, they're going to expect to see fewer bullets. So in this case, his third position at the bottom, he didn't end up with any bullets. So then Bob says, what did I do with that role that's relevant to this position I'm applying for? Well, maybe it's not what I did, but how I did it. And that's what I want to describe. So it's not, that I got the walls painted, but how I went about getting them painted. Then you have the profile or the summary. There's many different formats for this. You may already have a favorite. This is one I often use, kind of what I call a professional identity. And then the bullets are 3 to 6 things the employer wants someone in this role to do and do well that you can support in the rest of the resume. So let's look at Bob's professional summary. I am a management professional. with extensive experience leading virtual distributed team in technical development programs. And then his bullets, you'll see they're all in the present tense. They are not car stories. They're statements of, if you hire me, this is what I will do for you. So the entire profile is a statement about this is who I am and what I can offer you. And the entire rest of the resume, right, is that proof that what you said in the profile or the summary is true. Some of the other things that you may want to include in your resume, a section on other relevant experience. As I said, this is where volunteer work or a hobby or freelance work could come in. What, if anything, other than just the basic information you want to include in your education? Do you want to have a professional development section that talks about how you keep current in the field? And what do you want to include in your skills section that's relevant to the job you're applying for? It's almost there. We do a final check. Now, there are a number of tools out there that will compare your resume to the job description and tell you if you're missing any important keywords or key phrases. The one I'm most familiar with is jobscan.co. And so you enter your resume, enter the job description, and then you get a list of hard skills, soft skills, other keywords that you're missing. And then you decide, you go back to the job and you decide, hey, is it important that I get that in there or not? And you want to ask these two questions. Have I demonstrated my qualifications as best I can? Is everything in the resume relevant? Because if it's not relevant, why is it there? Get it out. We're going to look at a couple samples. Actually, don't have James Bond's. So here's Bob. We already saw his profile. We saw some of his work experience. Okay. Profile says, here's who I am, what I can offer you. Now let me prove it. You'll see he wanted to include some previous positions, but didn't include bullets because they're long enough ago. He just wanted to show career progression. He also has a competency section. It makes sense for him because he's in a very technical field. For many, many fields, you would not include a long list like this. Here's actually the resume I used 10 years ago for the role I have now. And so here's my summary. I am a career development professional with 20 years experience. 4 bullets. This seems to be what they're looking for, and I can prove my competency in these areas in the rest of my resume. You'll notice that a lot of my relevant experience came from one job. So instead of having just a long list of 10 bullets, do you see how I broke it down into these 3 subcategories, which suddenly makes it easier to read again? And remember, people don't read resumes. They skim them. And in fact, somebody skimming this probably is just going to read the headings and not even the bullets underneath them. So if you have a situation like that where a lot of your experience is coming from one position, you may want to consider creating 2 to 4 subcategories like this. Education, you can, other relevant experience. This is my volunteer experience that indeed was relevant to working in alumni relations because it has to do with recruiting and developing volunteers. And that's part of what we do in alumni relations. A different job, I might have included, not even have included the other relevant experience, or maybe I would have included it, but with entirely different bullets. The education section, the question of dates always comes in. If you're at all concerned about ageism and that your educational dates could be a detriment, just leave them off, okay? And then professional development, again, answers the question, how is this person keeping current in their field? All right, so there we are, 8 steps. I have to catch up on my notes here, hold on. You're thinking, wow, that's a lot. And it is. It's a lot of work. But let's keep in mind why we're doing this. We're doing it so that when you apply online, you have maximized the likelihood of making it through all those filters we talked about. Because you have submitted a targeted resume that clearly demonstrates your qualifications and helps you get through all the filters and get to an interview. All right, ready to take some questions.
And we've got them. It's going to be rapid fire because we only have 11 minutes left. Wayne asked, if the applicant tracking system is doing this initial screening, presumably instantly through some algorithm, why does it take weeks before hearing a response?
So that organization may still use an ATS, but not use it to do the initial screen. And for instance, I know here at LaSalle, that is the case, okay? And so the hiring manager is able to look at all 20 or 120 applicants. And the automatic message that says, sorry, you haven't been selected, doesn't go out until that hiring manager goes in and says, here's the person I've hired. And so even though maybe you were eliminated earlier in the process, if that hiring manager doesn't say, oh, I need to let people know that they're no longer in the running, if the hiring manager depends on the ATS system to do that for them, that's why you may not hear for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Great. Frustrating, but thanks for the answer.
Very, very frustrating.
Right. Gabrielle wrote, how do we consider when a job posting asks for a certain degree? Like, let's say they ask for a master's degree and you only have a bachelor's degree. Is it still worth applying?
Okay. So, sometimes it'll say preferred, okay? And if you see that, but you feel that you've got strong qualifications, then I would encourage you to apply. If they say required, it could easily be used as a way of screening you out. And that's when those second and third implications become crucial. Developing that internal advocate, because then that internal advocate can go to the hiring manager and say something like this. I know you're hiring for such and such, and you've indicated a master's degree on there, but I know someone you should take a good look at because I really think she's the kind of person you're looking for, even though she doesn't meet that specific requirement. So having that internal advocate becomes really crucial in situations like that. Unfortunately, companies, again, because they want to filter it down to a manageable number, they have these criteria, which may or may not really be particularly valid. So having that inside connection is crucial in that situation.
That's a good point. Thank you. When it comes to red pieces in a job description, if you're in, let's say you're in a computer programming degree and you want to apply for a computer programming job, and it's for languages and apps that you're going to be following in your program, is it okay to say that those are courses that you're going to be following because this person wants to be honest when they're putting in their application?
Okay. So you know that your future coursework is going to include that, but it hasn't yet. So
right.
then you can have a bullet in your education section, and you could say future coursework to include, and you could list the programming language or particular skills or particular knowledge areas. Okay, so that would be how I would handle that. Okay. If it's a course that you're currently taking, you could talk about more in progress or whatever. But if you know you're going to be getting it, then yes, include that in the education. Future coursework to include and then list it.
Great. Thanks. And this one is related to that slide where you were talking about going beyond tasks and responsibilities. The person wrote, in a resume, if you perform different duties within the company at the same time, how would you document that in the resume?
So again, keeping in mind that the resume is not a historical document documenting everything that you're doing or have done, but it's marketing you for a particular role. You want to ask yourself, for this particular position I'm applying for, of all the duties I do, which ones are relevant? And then those are the only ones you're going to include in the resume.
Yeah, and that's related to the next question that Lauren had, that she's, let's say, performing a job right now that really doesn't fit the job she wants to apply for, whereas the past jobs did. So not focus so much on this current job.
Right. So write that summary at the top. Again, emphasize in the bullets, look at what they're looking for and create those 4 to 6 bullets in the summary. It says, here's what I can offer you. Your evidence is going to primarily come from previous positions. Then for the current position, you're going to have to use the brain a little bit and say, okay, maybe it's not so much what I'm doing in my current position, but how I'm doing it. So it's the way I collect data rather than the kind of data I'm collecting. Or it's the way that I interact with my colleagues rather than what I'm interacting with them about. So you are still bringing who you are with all your gifts and strengths and abilities to whatever you do. So tap into how you go about doing it and think about how that's relevant to the roles that you're applying for, and then emphasize that.
Right. So it's not the what, it's how. Cool.
In some cases, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. That's that whole idea of transferable skills, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I might be using a particular skill in my current job. My current job isn't highly relevant, but the skill and the way I go about it, the very way I approach my work is going to be highly relevant to where I want to go. But
Fantastic.
Again, if you're making a significant, well, it sounds like she's more like returning to there's a continuity with previous roles. So yes, I would emphasize the relevance of those previous, and then in the current role, again, it may not be so much what you're doing, but how you go about doing what you do.
Great. Thanks, Lauren, for asking that. If your current job scope includes responsibilities beyond the role you're applying for, should you include them?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. If your current job scope includes responsibilities beyond the role you're applying for, should you include them, and how?
Only if they're relevant. So if they're not relevant to the job you're applying for, you would not include them. Let's say I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe half my job now is doing one-on-one career coaching with alumni, and I apply for a job that doesn't involve that. I'm not going to include that on my resume.
Right.
Does that address the question?
I think so, because you really want to focus on what they're asking for.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Dilute the information.
Right. Now, so again, I might say, half my job I'm not going to talk about. But just example for me, early in my current role, I set up an access database to keep track of my one-on-one appointments and collect certain data so I could run statistics at the end of the year. Maybe that's relevant, the job I'm applying for, but not the one-on-one coaching I'm doing. So again, really look at what you're doing and say, what is relevant? And then highlight that.
Great. Jillianne asked, I've heard it's important to keep supporting bullet points to one line each. Is that not actually important?
Gosh, one thing, once you start working on a resume and showing it to people, if that hasn't happened to you already, it will happen to you. You will hear all kinds of things, and the things you hear will conflict. And so, I'm kind of giving you my take. I don't subscribe to the keep it to one line. You do want them to be succinct, to not ramble on. You want to keep in mind people will skim, and so you want that engaging action verb. So if you're finding you're using the same verb at the beginning of your bullets, just Google resume action verbs. Right, and kind of come up with some of those, and because that action verb is going to pull somebody into reading more. All right, but if every bullet starts with developed, assisted, organized, right, they're just going to. But if you get some sexier action verbs there, it's going to pull them into reading a bit more. So yeah, be succinct. But I have never tried to keep everything to one line.
Okay. Well, we have 1 minute and one question left. Shall we go for it? What ways might be best to learn the language of an industry if you're trying to change fields so the resume language is relevant?
Great. So begin collecting job descriptions is one way to do that. So they don't have to be from your preferred geographic area. They could be from anywhere in the country, as long as they're kind of representative of the positions you want to be targeting. So you begin just by reading those, you're going to learn some language. Find out what the professional associations are in that field, and get involved in your local or state chapter and begin to meet people. Do informational interviewing with people. Use LinkedIn to try and find somebody who has made a similar career shift to what you're making, if you can. You have to do some digging to do that. And then invite a conversation, ask them how they did it. Talk to professionals in the field and ask them, hey, how do you keep up with how the field is changing? So are there particular thought leaders they follow on LinkedIn? Are there particular blogs they follow? Are there podcasts they listen to? E-newsletters they subscribe to, whatever. All of that will begin to give you that language, that lingo.
Well, thank you so much. We're right at the top of the hour. I can't believe it. Thank you, Debra. I loved your presentation. I hope everybody got their questions. I think all the questions were answered, so we're good to go. And I will be sending out the recording shortly. But thank you, Debra. You're a great wildcat, and really appreciate your time.
All right. It's great to be with you all. Go Cats.
Take care. Bye, everyone.
So I do see some questions. Oops. Is there any way to save the chat? Zachary, more settings. Okay.